Hello, everyone. This is Nicholas Capman. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown. Before we jump into our discussion for today, just a little bit about the FDA group. We help life science companies in the areas of quality assurance, regulatory affairs, clinical operations, commissioning, qualification, and validation, as well as pharmacovigilance. We offer three different engagement models, which are consulting, staff augmentation, and full-time employee recruitment. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to the fdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch. So today I am speaking with Marcus Gesner. Hey Marcus, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining. So before we jump into the topic for today, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm Marcus Gesner. I'm currently the Vice President of Quality for embecta. We're a medical device company based out of New Jersey. I've spent the last couple decades or more in the med device pharmaceutical space with some larger firms, be it Boston Scientific, Olympus, Covidien, and a few others. Primarily leading in the quality space all the way from design to operations to compliance to remediations and so forth. Been in a senior executive leadership role for over a decade now in a couple of companies, and actually began my career in the medical space. I'm a nurse by training and spent the better part of a decade working bedside in a hospital here in Massachusetts. So pleased to
Great.
be here.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So what are we going to be talking about today?
I think our topic today is building high performance teams and driving meaningful change through organizations out of that performance.
Okay. Well, let's start off by kind of talking about, what are some of the specific outcomes that define high performance and quality in organizations?
Yeah, that is the I would say what we'd call the magic or the secret sauce question of every quality organization. What defines effective quality? And as I look at it and have for years now, I think most quality organizations don't get the answer completely correct or have an incomplete answer. I believe a high performing quality organization does a few things for a company, and hopefully the company also, realizes that, and we're going to talk more about that as well. But really, I see quality focused on protecting a company's right to compete, right? As you look at the marketplace, you look at medical device or pharmaceuticals or biologics, the reality of the universe is that you need the permission from a government to do business. And sort of every business needs that, right? You need an occupancy permit for your building and these types of things. But I'm talking about on a broad level in order to sell your products, right? And so with that comes certain rigor that you have to apply, whether it be following regulations, protecting patient safety, and so forth. And I think a lot of quality organizations focus on that. And when they do that, they build up this stereotype or cliche that you hear a lot, quality of the police, or I don't want to be the enforcement organization or what have you. And I think that stereotype exists, a bit for a reason, right? Because sometimes that does happen where quality organizations stand in the line. So in a highly effective org, you're protecting your right to compete, but there's another half to that equation. And that's where I think it brings significant value to companies overall beyond just protecting ability to get revenue, which is providing a very consistent supply chain and providing consistent products that are reliable to your customers and patients. A high functioning quality unit is allowing for your manufacturing processes, your design processes to produce an outcome at speed that you can commercialize and be able to generate revenue off of. Right? So the quality organizations, I see a lot of them focused on, hey, it's FDA as your FDA group, right? And all the focus on regulators and so forth. And that's all very true. But the real the real money is earned by ensuring that you're not having these manufacturing disruptions or you're having these supply disruptions, whether it's component issues or a design that when you're trying to transfer into manufacturing delays commercialization or these types of things. Quality is really should be focused in those areas to make sure that we're consistently delivering in that space.
So what I hear you talking about is we're focusing this conversation a lot on quality as opposed to compliance, and how can organizations leverage that specific function of quality in order to gain an advantage. Is that right?
Absolutely. Quality as they're structured, if done well, is a problem-solving organization, whether it's a business problem, compliance problem, and there are other problem-solving organizations, right? R&D solves problems with products and comes up with new engineering solutions and so forth. Our job is to make sure that that fits all within the framework of generating the outcome that the business can commercialize, right? Whether that's a compliant product, it's a safe product, it's an effective product, it's a product that we can manufacture reliably and provide consistent care to the patient or end user.
Now, how can a organization determine if their quality unit is high performing? What are some of the indicators that it is or is not high performing?
Well, I think the one of the easiest indicators that you'll see around the industry is, okay, well, what's your compliance status? Everyone starts with that measuring stick, right? Are you in trouble with a regulator? Are you under some regulatory scrutiny? So on and so forth. But as you look at other high performing metrics, you look at, okay, what's our overall quality investment? What outcomes are we generating out of that, specifically, such as back orders, different types of disruptions, like what do you want to call it, a ship hold or shipping restrictions, different types of recalls. What types of complaints are you getting from the field, from your customer? What types of project delays are you having in the R&D space in between ideation and commercialization? These types of metrics are the things that I more focus on. Obviously you have to take care of compliance first. Everything builds off that foundation. So I'm just counting that as an entitlement level aspect of a quality organization.
That's the base level.
Talk about
baseline.
It's the baseline, right? It's the entry fee for quality, right? Really what we're talking about here is how do you perform at a high level that enables the company to function well, right? So whether it's you're validating processes within a manufacturing facility to make sure that when you're performing at speed, you don't have lots of disruptions, you don't have machine breakdowns, you don't have component problems. These are the types of things where quality can contribute. And frankly, in a lot of organizations, I think this is just overlooked, right?
Yeah.
Being able to provide consistent supply.
I heard you use the word investment in quality, and quality can be looked at as a cost center or a value driving center. So I like the fact that you used that word. We talked about some of the aspects of quality that are important. And I want to go back to the concept of how does somebody listening to this podcast know if they're high performing? Let's dive a little bit deeper. What are some of the critical aspects for them to understand where their current state is and where they should be focusing their time and energy?
So I think, I'll skip over, of course, the basic compliance.
Right. Yeah, we'll skip through that.
Are you meeting MDR timelines? Are you corrective actions take 6 years to get completed, right? Assuming that's that stuff and you haven't scraped your knee with some regulator. Beyond that, what you look at is outcomes. And when I say outcomes, I'm talking about defect rates in the plants, how stable are your processes, right? What are your hold metrics? How often do you have to something leave a plant and becomes a hold that you have to stop before it gets distributed to market, right? Because there's some sort of issue. What do your project timelines look like? Are you constantly what I call sliding to the right, or you have slippage in design activities or even sustaining engineering activities relative to quality deliverables and quality processes, right? Sometimes it's not the people. Sometimes it's the process is so arduous that you're causing disruption in that regard. Things that you can look at here or that I've done in the past as well are what you can call like a near miss metric. So holds are a near miss, right? That's a near miss. You could look at things where you want to brand it sort of a quality incident. So when a defect is made in a certain operation, is it passed on to the next operation, or is that defect detected and addressed? What sort of mechanisms do you have in place to prevent that defect? And that can apply to everything in quality, whether you're filing an MDR, you're completing a change control document, or you're manufacturing a widget at a workstation, right? You don't want to pass that defect on so it can get on through the process and then on to the patient. So these types of things are things where you look at a highly mature, highly effective organization is looking for everything as a manufacturing process, whether you're creating an MDR or what have you, and then measuring the success on that based on the defects that are created or the potential errors that can occur, and what sort of a prevention do you have in place to fix that. Mm-hmm. A classic quality trap for those types of things is they start to do 1/1 reviews. Oh, we have a defect, and so now I'm going to have 3 people review it instead of 1. Versus really stepping back and saying, okay, like how do we make the process invincible, right? So those metrics would I really focus on are the holds. What are we seeing within the plants? What type of scrap rates, line down? You can look at metrics such as OEE. If you have high-speed automation, it really depends on the process, right? In the design space, it's fairly easier, mostly time-based and delivery-based metrics, right? And then in the compliance space, I think those are pretty easy. Those are sort of the entitlement level, framework that you step in quality, right? You have to submit an MDR within 30 days most of the time, right? These are the kinds of things that I think those general tenets, everybody knows. But it's going beyond that to drive improvement that I think is super important.
Mm-hmm. Great point. So in the realm of wanting a high-performing quality team, where does leadership come into play as it pertains to creating and maintaining a high-performing quality function, and the culture of the organization? Where do those two things come into play?
Yeah, we touched on this earlier, which is investment. And the question is how invested is a company in quality outcomes, customer satisfaction, compliance, and so forth. And the way you kind of look at that with a senior leadership organization and you're driving change is, how is the company incentivized? Are people's variable bonuses tied to certain quality outcomes? Right? Are there compliance metrics or patient safety or, like I said, holds, these types of things? You really look at that. You look about how people are incentivizing behavior, and then how they reward the behavior that you want to see, right? So you get a nice positive feedback mechanism. I've seen a lot of organizations that pay lip service to how important quality is, to our quality policy, and quality is number 1. But then when you really peel it back and look at it, they're not incentivized to deliver on quality, right? They're incentivized commercially in other areas, or certain cost reductions, or whatever the case may be. I would say that when I say investment in quality, you look at the quality organization relative to the organizations it needs to serve. Quality is a service organization, of a service organization, if you will. And, you've got regulatory that you have to interface with. You've got R&D, you've got the commercial teams, you've got manufacturing operations, and so forth. Sometimes, hopefully not legal, but there's there's always those two. And how are you indexed to those specific orgs, right? Is it really out of whack? And you look at those types of ratios of whether it's investment off of revenue, what your quality spend is, and then what does your scope and scale of the organization look like, and how that's wired up. What's the wireframe of that in the overall? That gives you a good view in a company of kind of how they view quality. Because I'm an economist, people will do what they're incentivized to do. That incentive can be positive or negative. I have better luck with positive incentive. Of course, there are always negative incentives, right? Where you scrape your knee with a regulator, or you have some massive product disruption, recall that's like business ending, right? Those are terrible scenarios. Really, you want to incentivize the behavior that happens consistently through the year.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly goes to the sugar works better than vinegar, although there is a place for vinegar. But I think people would prefer to focus their time and effort on the sugar aspect, right? Um, let's say somebody listening to this feels that they have the correct understanding of what it takes to create a high performing culture. They're not there yet. But they need to address the issues that are coming from leadership and the culture as a whole. They're hearing some lip service to your earlier point. What type of advice would you give to somebody that has a baseline understanding of where they need to go? However, they need to get the buy-in from leadership and try to shift that culture of quality being a poster on the board as opposed to a living and breathing organism.
So there's definitely different, methodologies that I've used. You're talking about influencing, at the executive level, so it drives down through the organization, and I would say enacting and inciting the correct outcomes and behavior patterns you'd like to see. I think specifically you can focus in a couple of areas, presuming that there is no burning crisis, right? Where you've got an FDA warning letter, 43, some traumatic recall or what have you. I mean, excluding those types of scenarios where people get the vinegar, as you said, the negative incentive to participate in quality. I think that it focuses on what I've talked about earlier, which is providing the value assessment of quality, providing the outcomes and how those outcomes are generating opportunities for the business, right? Everybody gets the, hey, we've got to be compliant stuff. And we do this validation because the FDA makes us. But have we talked about what would happen if we didn't do the validation? What sort of a process improvements would we have? What type of scrap and yield rates would we have? Right? What type of customer satisfaction would we have if we had a low reliability, device that was going out? So these are the types of things I think you can focus on, where you can show as a problem solving org, whether it's decreasing customer complaints, increasing, plant effectivity or manufacturing effectivity, increasing process efficiencies, and then speed to market, right? Another case, if you're in a startup or you're in a company that maybe isn't massively commercialized, a lot of your promise of the future is how fast you're able to get to the market, do your disruption or whatever the case may be. And so these are the types of things that you focus on, of like, okay, quality can help enable these types of things, and here's how. And I think a lot of people take a different approach I've seen in the past, which is they show up and they're saying, well, if you don't listen to me, the FDA is going to like tear your face off. And so I don't think people, I mean, they may respond to that, but I think over time it becomes a level of fatigue around that. And I think if you're able to use the positive mechanisms of like, okay, here's the level of service we can offer. Here's what happens when quality goes in and takes apart a line and works with your engineers and gets things done. Here's what happens when we embed ourselves with R&D, and you're able to get speed to market. Specifically, what I mean by that is not finishing the project on time, but also, the whole point of this design cycle, not beyond creating the product, is to create a package of information that gets reviewed by a regulator in the first pass, right? That's the idea. You don't want to be stuck in perpetual loops in the approval cycle, right?
Hmm.
So speed to market where quality can help is R&D and smart, people. They understand the mechanics, the product, all this other stuff. How do we shape that into a set of information that a regulator is willing to approve, right? These are the types of things where you can focus and show your value. Hey, we got a 510(k) approved with no reviews, no AIRs, no additional requests for information. We got a PMA approved, in under 90 days. We got, these are the types of outcomes that people that are commercially minded, whether they're a CFO or they're, a GM or a CEO or what have you, they can see that as a real advantage of getting to market faster, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so it helps them out greatly.
Yeah. So let's say, I'm listening to this and I understand what it takes to create a high performing culture, or a high performing quality group. I have the leadership's buy-in. The culture is on the right path toward developing that. But we're in a period of growth. Um, how do I ensure that I'm recruiting correctly, that I'm onboarding correctly, and that I'm developing practices so that this new team that I'm building out is going to be aligned with a high performing quality organization?
That is the secret overall, I would say, is that in order to be great, you have to, that's that cliche, right? In order to be great, you have to surround yourself with greatness. And so I can say what I look for and, kind of where I am, and people might find this helpful or might not. I look for a few things in building a high performing team and organization. Um, I look for drive and energy. Are people that are you the type of person that's going to lean in, right? Have you leaned in? Have you had experience or, willing to take on global change? It's a courageous thing to take on change in an organization or change a process that may have been standing for 10 years, where people have just got a lot of emotional investment. It takes a lot of courage. A lot of people don't want to get involved in that, right? And the last is how creative they are, right? I'm assuming that, anybody you talk to for a specific role, whatever the level, has got the technical acumen that you would look for, and that you've sort of emotionally evaluated them for the fit in your ecosystem, right? Some people might be fantastic, but they're just a bad ecosystem fit,
Mm.
right? So you can't have that much disruption in the org. So I look for what I would say creativity and imagination, right? Are they the type of people that say we can do that, and here's how, where you're staying within regulatory framework, within, the boundaries, but you're able to come up with innovative entrepreneurial solutions that enable the organization to continue to evolve, right? These people can be disruptors, right? They can go in and be disruptive, but you've got to make sure that they do it in a way that's positive. They come in and say, well, I don't know why you guys are doing that. That's stupid. I would do X, Y, or Z. That's not that people don't like to hear that, right? What people want to hear is, I think we can get a different outcome if we try this. What do you think? Right? Those are the type of people that you're looking for, and that seek to understand and then innovate and drive change. And honestly, the imagination is kind of the hardest thing to find. I think Disney calls them Imagineers, right? People that
Hmm.
come up with these things. I think the creativity is a hard thing to find.
Um, so you did a good job of describing the types of people we want to recruit. Um, is there any special sauce that you want to share about how to get them to join the team and what needs to take place during the onboarding process? Now, I talk about in my book, The Passionate Workforce, that creating a passionate team begins on the first interview. Um, and it kind of goes from there. Um, but assuming we know what we're looking for, do you have any tips, tricks, pieces of advice in terms of how to get them on board? What do you need from leadership? What do you think needs to be offered? And then during that onboarding process, what are some critical components that you think need to be thought about and implemented in order to make sure that the friction toward a high performing quality organization isn't high?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on. The candidate journey, from the first interaction all the way through the process is so critical. And I think we've all had experiences in different companies where those types of things have ended in tears, basically, where you've lost out on a high performing candidate or a very highly desirable candidate for one interaction or another. Typically, what I focus on is when we're looking for a particular role, is to make sure that you've got the interactions, the interview team, and everybody's on the same page as to what the objective is, right? I've seen HR and other organizations, they have this template of generic questions that you
Hmm.
ask, right? Like how many times did you fall off your bike when you were 5 years old, kind of thing. And I think it's hard to do that. You really want to show the person that you're genuinely interested in their expertise and that it's a mutual conversation, right? Where you're trying to find out more about the candidate and you want them to find out as much about you.
Hmm.
I can tell you in interviews that I do, after basic introductions, the first thing I ask the candidate is, what questions can I answer for you about the company?
Hmm.
I don't go into questions about that I have about them. I've looked at their resume. I know what questions I have, but it's more important for me for them to understand what it is that they're coming into and signing up for, and is that the fit for them? And I think a lot of people really do appreciate that in the journey. If there's the cliche, it's always better to be, wanted versus needed, right? And people want to feel like, hey, there's a bit of quote unquote romance here
Hmm.
where we're building excitement.
I use that analogy in my book
Oh,
that
you do.
yeah, I talk about how recruiting and onboarding people is like dating. So it's funny you said that.
It's very true, right? And at the end of the day, if all things fit, you got to make sure you close the deal. So there are very small things that I think go a long way with these types of candidates. Not having lots of dead air, right? So, as you're a candidate going through the journey, if you've got 2 weeks of dead air, that's bad, right? You constantly want your team to be sure to make sure they're managing expectations of that candidate. It's super important. Depending on the role, you want to have or may want to have some senior leader speak to that person to show them the importance of the role, right? So there'll be times where I talk to a supervisor or a plan. I'm not there to judge whether they're the right hire. I'm there to sell the opportunity of joining our company to them. That's my job, right? And so having whether it's a GM or a marketing person or whoever it is, a high level R&D person, take interest in this hire shows that, hey, we take this seriously. You're not a cog in the wheel, in the machine rather. And, you know, it's important to us that you join the company and we take this seriously at the highest levels of the org. I think that's a major deal closer to be able to speak with senior folks.
Yeah. It's interesting because what you said without saying it explicitly is that you want to put your organization in the best position to make the decision about whether or not you want that candidate. So if you focus too much time on are they the right person, you tend to forget, oh, they need to pick me because they're obviously interviewing at other places as well. So selling them on the opportunity and using some of those tactics that you mentioned ensure that there's a higher probability that that you're in the lead in terms of the places they're looking to move to. And then at that point, you can then make the decision as to whether or not they're the right fit, because obviously we're still in the midst of the interview process. So I think that's all good stuff. So let's say we've made the offer, they've accepted, it's time to onboard. We've heard the stories about nightmare onboarding situations and the type of resentment it can create in a new hire. So what are some of the recommendations that you would make in order to get them onboarded adequately and in the mindset that they're joining a high performing quality organization?
So when I look at these types of situations, I think that there's some things that are sort of role dependent, right? So is the role a brand new carve out role? Is it a straight up, backfill where someone has moved on or you've moved somebody on, whatever the case may be? Um, is it carving out? Is it a build? Is it, where does it sit in the organization? And I think why that matters is it drives what I would call sort of a landing plan. So what I like to do for candidates is to make sure that as they're coming on board for a specific role, that we put together the interactions of the first, call it 3 to 4 weeks of sort of what training, what meetings do they need to go, who do they need to meet, you know, introductions, org announcements, what sort of training do they need to have. And you want to give them time at the front end without bombarding them to take care of all the things that you need to do that are on people's minds when they start a new job. Hey, is my health insurance? Hey, where's my check going to get deposited? These types of things. You want to make sure that you give, people the time to get all of those things sorted out, right? Do I need extra disability insurance or whatever the case may be, right? That's all part of the journey. And you want to make sure that people sort of get through that. So I think it's very important for that. As part of that landing plan, depending on the role, you want them to meet with all the key stakeholders for two reasons. One is they may or may not have met them through the interview process. Most likely, some of them have, if you've done it well. The other is so that they know who to interact with when they want to solve problems or when they need something or when they need to, enact change, right? Who do I pick up the phone and call or text? I guess these days no one calls anybody anymore, but those are the types of things that I think are important. So I look at the first, call it 30, 60 days, whatever you want to lay out, especially the first 30 as a complete learning journey. Get in, get acclimated to the organization, meet everybody. I don't put serious demands on people right away. Hey, I need something this or I need that. My asks are usually pretty basic. Hey, first 2 weeks, just make sure you get your health insurance done, get all the required HR trainings you got to get out of the way, your anti-corruption training and everything else. Get all this sort of administrivia behind you, get you acclimated to the team that you've now joined, right? And then the last thing is to show, genuine excitement around the fact that the person's there, right? I think it's important because, if it's like, hey, Bob, how you doing, kind of thing, you want everybody to be happy that you've got this person on board. They're excited for the potential that this person brings and sort of whether it's change or more energy or a different viewpoint, whatever it is that you're investing in this particular candidate, you want to make sure that that is emphasized and appreciated by everybody. So I try to make sure that they meet all those people and that the people are in the mindset of, hey, we're appreciative that this person's here and we're excited that they've joined. And it's a little bit of extra effort for a hiring manager to sit down and go through like a landing plan and actually put meetings on the person's calendar, schedule them with everybody else that they need to meet and everything else. But I think it goes a long way in showing how appreciative you are when they join day one and you go, okay, here's your laptop, we've printed out here's your schedule for the next 2 weeks. We've got all these types of things. You start your day with a your initial meeting, whether it's HR or hiring manager or whatever, and you just start the ball rolling where people feel like, okay, this is buttoned up and people appreciate that I'm here.
Mhm. You talked about excitement in developing that. I'd like to hear if you have any recommendations on how to do that. I think for people that are naturally exciting, it's not a challenge. For people that have to exert energy in order to promote that sense of excitement. They're probably looking for some tips and tricks. So if you could do that, and then I'm going to add on top of that question, you mentioned, without mentioning it, some of the do's and don'ts for onboarding. So if there are any other do's and don'ts that you want to add before we move to the next topic, please do.
Yeah, for sure. Aside from, sticking somebody with an EpiPen and getting them excited, I think part of part of the equation is you should have or should be, as a hiring manager, when you're setting up these landing plans, talking to everybody about why this person's here and what they're bringing to the organization, right? And you need to generate that with them. Hey, I'm bringing this person in. They're coming in and they're going to help with XY project, or they're going to be, driving this. Their primary mission is X or Y. You make them part invested in the process per se, right? Where they're excited of what the output and what this person's going to do. It's a little harder with a backfill. And I say that because whoever that person is, internal customer, stakeholder, what have you, will remember that, what Janet did in the job, and now Janet's not here. And, why is this, Janet took another job, graduated from our company to another company, whatever the case may be, retired. Um, So I think what you've got to do is be able to differentiate that for people as to like what's the difference on the go forward, and what's changing in the position, and why this candidate is the fit, and generating it from that perspective. Otherwise, the people are going to go into these meetings and they're going to have this yardstick that they're measuring against from the previous candidate, who also might have been high performing as well. But you've got to generate the uniqueness around this particular candidate.
hmm And then any other do's and don'ts that you wanted to add, or do you feel like you've covered the important ones?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm the like world-renowned expert on do's and don'ts. I think some of them are fairly obvious, right? That we're in a constant contact society. So, if you've hired somebody, you've got a big team, checking in on them, right? How's it going? So what I do typically is, if I'm a hiring manager, I make sure that I've got short meetings, 2, 3 times a week for the first few weeks with the person. Show them that you're dedicating the time to them to make sure that they're coming into the organization. That's a major do. The don't on the other side of that is, you know, don't bring them in and just thrust them into the deep end of the pool and kind of walk away, right?
hmm
Um, some people can survive in that sink or swim type culture, and most people can't, is my
Yeah.
experience. So I think that, making sure that there is constant contact. I'm not talking about coddling people or, hey, being over exuberant, right? But I think it's more of just showing your general leadership style, of the fact that you're engaged as a leader, that, you're want to ensure that this person's onboarding is successful, that they have their best foot forward as they join your company, because ultimately, as a leader, your success is driven on their success, of course, right? So if someone comes in and falls flat on their face, that doesn't look bad on that person. It looks bad on you as a leader, right? You
hmm
didn't do the investment, you brought the wrong candidate in, or whatever you did, but ultimately you're wearing that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Great points. So we brought this person in, we've got leadership's buy-in, we identified the right person, we onboarded them correctly. How do we effectively ensure that they're communicating and collaborating across functions and hierarchies?
I think the first step in that we already discussed, which is making sure that you have a landing plan and they understand who all their internal stakeholders are, right?
Yeah.
Who is their customer? what organization are they serving? So if you're, a design assurance manager or director or VP, who's the stakeholder set, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I think it's important to embed the culture that you solve problems and work through improvements and ideas as a team. So it's important to have collaboration sessions, even more so today in this virtual world. If the virus apocalypse ever taught us anything,
Mm.
it's you've got to put more energy and effort into maintaining connection with people.
Well, let me pause you there because I want to make your answer a little bit more complicated. So, as you're
Sure.
going about answering that, what are some of the barriers, cultural, structural, interpersonal, that you think hinder that team cohesion that we're talking about?
Well, the biggest barrier is time, always, right? Someone's overburdened or they perceive that they're overburdened and they don't have time for somebody. Yeah, I can talk to you 3 Tuesdays from now. I can't get on the person's calendar and so forth. So I think that that's always the biggest, right? Um, and if you've gone through the interview and hiring process, of course, everyone's got their best face on through that process and everything else, that you've done a good job of they fit in the ecosystem, right? So I think it's important in these interactions is that people are connecting at some personal level, not necessarily like you go to your colleague's bar mitzvah, right? But more of um, making sure that you know where they're at so you can meet them, you can have this casual interactive dialogue. You build these opportunities where you invest to make sure that you've got staff meetings that isn't necessarily everybody telling the boss what good stuff they're doing. Staff meetings that are more focused on, okay, this isn't a boss update. I can get that on an email. The questions are like, what are we working as a team? Okay, Kevin, what is it that you are working on that Nicholas needs to know about? What can you guys, collaborate together? So I think making sure that everybody has the time for everybody else is the biggest problem
Hmm.
these days.
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, okay, so we're moving forward in this journey, I think, that we've created on this podcast. Now let's get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts, right? How do we hold these people accountable without preventing their ability to innovate, or decreasing their morale? Because we use dating as an analogy. We could use also parenting as an analogy. And so, you've got to engage in these difficult conversations, but if you don't come at it in the correct manner, it might be a protect my job CYA type of thing where I'm not willing to innovate because, I don't want to put myself at risk and put myself out there. Or, what probably comes before that is just that decrease in morale that I joined this company thinking A and now it's B. So can you comment on that?
Absolutely. I think as you look at that paradigm of making sure that people are accountable, what I look at is tension, right? So when you're designing your organization, when you have your metrics and your goals and objectives and everything else that you put out there in front of everybody, it's putting the appropriate level of tension on those. And that people, the first part of that starts with everybody understanding what it is the outcome that they're looking to deliver on, right? So there's a specific outcome, whether it's hey, you can't have late MDRs, as basic as that, to, hey, there's a spurt, we got to get 5% decrease in scrap out of a specific production line. And so it's starting with that accountability, and then it's having regular feedback, right? And you've got to make sure that those sessions on feedback, metric reviews, business reviews, one-on-ones are not show up and get beat up,
Mm,
right? So we've all been in the corporate world where it's get called into the EVP's office for your weekly use suck meeting, right? And so nobody's looking for that, but you do have to have a level of tension where people understand what they're accountable for and they live with that burden. That's part of being high performance. You look at high performance athletes, high performance people, there's a healthy level of tension either between the coach and them, or it's between themselves and what they're looking to achieve as their goals. But you've got to have some level of tension. If there's not any tension, anxiety, or focus on those types of things, it tends to lower the overall energy level that goes into it. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, it's because you used the word tension. I'm imagining a rope, right? If it's too loose, what are we doing? And if it's too tight, it's going to snap. So that appropriate guitar string of tension that can create music, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's the art of it all, right? We've talked about the science of it, and that's really the art. So I think it's kind of up to each individual person to figure out, how do I create that adequate amount of tension, and what's the style in which I go about doing that. Um, so this has been a really good podcast. I really appreciate your insight. I want to put the cherry on top. So we've gone this far in the journey. We always are looking for our teams to improve themselves and intrinsically if possible. So what advice would you leave the audience with in terms of how do we make sure that they don't become stagnant and they flourish in their role and within the organization?
I would say, as I look at a couple decades in quality and where quality people struggle, is communication. I think in the development area, most quality people that I've run into are very smart. They understand regulations, but I think the thing to focus on an improvement, and things that I focus on with my team, is how do you take a complex quality problem or issue or improvement and distill it down to where it's something important for a commercial person, let's say, somebody that doesn't know anything about quality, without going into sort of the alphabet soup of your company and all the different acronyms and so on and so forth. So as people look to improve, one of the things that I look for the most is the ability for them to develop being able to communicate. Once you're able to communicate effectively, then you get into how to influence outcomes and influence the agreements that you have, right? Finding in a conversation, understanding where somebody is, finding the 10% that the two of you agree on, and then building from there. And I think those are the two things that give quality a real influence over the organization, if you're really able to explain it simply. And I've had a couple of mentors and people that I've worked for that have really been shining examples of that I've learned from through my career. And I think it's important for people, as you're developing them, the focus is always, how do we communicate issues to the company where it's meaningful to everybody, that elicits the response, the action, the investment, the caring, the behavior pattern, the culture. That's the start of it all, is how we communicate with the rest of the company.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Marcus, I really appreciate you joining the Life Science Rundown. This was really, really great insight. Much appreciated. And for everybody listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. If you have not already, subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast, and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect about project or resource needs, head over to thefdagroup.com to get in touch, or feel free to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.